Welcome to Critical Thinking Skills in Science. We're on Chapter 9, the different scientific models. This is session number 7. In this session, we're going to be looking at what's been labeled as young Earth creationism. And we're going to answer what are its main tenets, what is the source of reliable knowledge that it chooses. The primary source of reliable knowledge for a young Earth creationism would be the external authority, which be God as revealed through His Word, through revelation. Secondary sources, implementing human reason and empiricism. The culture it comes from, again, it's another Western culture tendency of looking at things. It's theology, God exists, and the study of creation proves it. Now, this is kind of a little different wrap on things or perspective in that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God is assumed to exist, and then it says that He then created. Whereas in creationism, in different models of creationism, they assume the position that it looks created. And by studying the creation, they can prove the Creator exists. It's kind of like taking intelligent design and saying it looks intelligently designed. And we're going to study this design and prove that it is designed and that therefore a designer exists. And many times this is how some that approach the young Earth creationism, they approach it as it looks created. And therefore we're going to study creation and prove that the Creator exists. So that is theology, God exists, and the study of creation proves it. Ontology, the spirit dimension is real. It's an open system, whereas the spiritual dimension has influence over the dimension of matter. The first cause, God, and there is no common ancestry, there is no evolution. There is only God created, and through His creative acts, everything that exists was created. Core belief, number 1, the Bible is the only truly reliable source of knowledge about the origin of the earth and the universe. Core belief number 2, scientific evidence, when properly interpreted, is consistent with a literalistic interpretation of Scripture, of the Bible. The Bible indicates that the earth and the universe were created between some 6,000 to 12,000 years ago, and all of geological history can be explained and interpreted through the biblical record. Young Earth creationism. What is the core belief? The core belief in young Earth creationism is, one, we're in the 21st century. It's kind of like, well, yeah, that doesn't take a big stretch of belief. We're in the 21st century, and that is from the crucifixion of Christ, the resurrection of Christ from the dead, the time of life in the year of the Lord. But Israel, the state of Israel, is in the 58th century. Not in the 21st century. They're in the 58th century Anno Mundi, which is AM 5786, which is when I'm recording right now, is that Israel is in the year AM 5786. They aren't in the year 2025. They're in the year AM Anno Mundi 5786. So where did they get that number from? Well, it's dating from creation itself. So in other words, Israel dates its existence or dates its calendar year back to the creation. Core beliefs. Number 4, the flood was responsible for producing most of the fossils during 1 year of human history rather than during hundreds of millions of years of Earth history before man arrived on the scene. Interpreting this would mean that a young Earth creationism, one, does not believe that there was hundreds of millions of years of Earth history, in that God created And when he created, he could have created it with an appearance of age. Some would say, well, no, that you can't do that. I said, well, let's say that God created Adam and Eve. And he created them on the sixth day. If we were to go visit the garden 2 weeks later, what would Adam look like? Would Adam be in what process of aging is he? Is he a baby? Is he a toddler after 2 weeks? Is he a young man? Is he a grown man that is cultivating a mature garden? So in other words, okay, so you're saying that maybe when God created, he created with the appearance of age because he had to create or did create Adam and Eve physiologically able to care for themselves and to care for the garden that God had created. So that is one way of looking at it, is that we cannot use science to go back to how old the earth is, because the earth does not go back to a 0 point. The earth only goes back to the point that God created it functioning and fully formed. So in other words, the flood was responsible for producing most of the fossils during 1 year of human history, rather than the hypothesized hundreds of millions of years of Earth history before man supposedly arrived on the scene. Core belief number 5. The fall of Adam and Eve radically altered the laws of nature, such that the pre-fall world was very different from the post-fall world in which we now live. Again, a little explanation to meaning that the fall of Adam and Eve, meaning their sin, when they went into sin, when they sinned and God cursed his creation because of them, how did that change things? And what they say is that Adam and Eve radically altered the laws of nature. In a previous discussion, we looked at the laws of nature versus the judicial laws of man, or even the Mosaic laws, in that the laws that were the Mosaic laws are prescriptive. In other words, they prescribe what has to happen or what should happen, and if that does not happen, then there are consequences to it. Whereas in the laws of nature, they are not prescriptive in any way of saying, okay, this is the way we've set them up, and if they do not continue this way, then that's a miracle. That would be a breaking of the law of nature, which God cannot do. So what happens here? Well, a law of nature is not prescriptive. A law of nature is only descriptive of what usually happens. And so what this group proposes is that there was a radical change in the laws of nature after difference between the pre-fall world and the post-fall world. They were very different. They had different rules, laws, practices. In other words, it was a different world that Adam and Eve were originally created into. And after sin entered in, that sin altered that world to such a dimension that it changed, that the world that we now live in is not the perfectly created world that God created. And a lot of people would say, well, if that is your creator, I wouldn't believe in him because he's not a very good creator, because look at this world, it's a mess. And it's kind of like, well, that is true. And the reasoning behind that would be, this is not the world that God originally created. This is a world that is suffering through sin, through the consequences of sin, through death, through disease, and that it is all going to be redeemed. It's all going to be reset to its original form of what God had intended it to be in the beginning, without the introduction of sin and its consequences. So in other words, this theory proposes that there was radically altered the laws of nature, and such that the pre-fall world was very different from the post-fall world in which we now live. Core belief number 6, man now has a fallen nature. The other ones didn't really talk very much about a fallen nature because they separated the spiritual realm from the physical realm as much as they could in the different scientific models. But in this model here, the two realms are not separated, and that because of sin and man's fall, he now has a fallen nature. This fallen nature has also brought with it suffering and death that were not a part of the original creation. And so it's kind of like, okay, how do we explain a good God that created a world that we now live in that is so corrupted, that is controlled by disease and death? And that is, one explanation is because it's not the same world, in that God created the world perfect, but because of sin and then death entering in, and the consequences of that sin and that death compounding, it has changed the world into what it is now today, which is a world that is groaning, a world that is waiting to be redeemed when Christ comes back. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. This is Chapter 9, Different Science Models, Session number 7. Thank you again for joining me.